The desert sun burned down on forward operating base Sentinel, a small outpost carved out of dust and wire in the heart of Afghanistan. Sandstorms rolled in without warning, battering the camp's HESCO walls and coating every rifle, every boot, every breath with grit. Life here was a cycle of watch shifts, supply drops, and the unending rattle of distant gunfire. To the men stationed there, it was war in its most grinding form. Among the clatter of boots and barked orders, she moved, quietly. To most of the Marines, she was just the girl who loads mags. Every day she sat under a canvas tent, sleeves rolled up, fingers working tirelessly to snap 5.56 rounds into M4 magazines or belt link 7.62 for the M240s. Her hair was tied back, face streaked with dust, but her movements carried a rhythm. Deliberate, precise, practiced. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was calm, steady. They didn't know her name. At least, not her real one. On paper, she was listed as Specialist Harper, Logistics Detail. To the men, she was background noise. But that morning, something changed. Colonel James Mattis, the legendary warrior monk of the Marine Corps, arrived at the outpost. His reputation preceded him. Brilliant strategist, unyielding leader, a man who carried history on his shoulders. The base snapped to attention. Marines straightened their gear. Patrols moved with sharper discipline, and even the dust seemed to hesitate in his presence. As the colonel walked the grounds, he noticed the woman at the ammo tent. She worked with her head down, sliding cartridges into magazines at a speed that caught his eye. Not rushed, not sloppy, efficient, surgical. He slowed his steps. "You there," he said, his voice cutting across the yard. Name? The tent fell silent. A few Marines smirked. Surely the colonel had better things to do than waste time on the supply girl. She looked up, her gaze steady, her posture straight, though she wasn't at full attention. "Specialist Harper, sir." The colonel studied her, his eyes narrowing. "Where'd you learn to load mags like that?" Her answer was simple. "Practice, sir." Something in her tone made him pause. He'd spoken to thousands of soldiers, but this one carried weight in her words. He didn't press further, not yet. That night, the base came under attack. Mortar rounds screamed overhead, exploding just outside the wire. The alarm blared. Marines scrambled for cover, grabbing weapons, rushing to the towers. The desert lit up with chaos. Inside the ammo tent, Harper was already moving. She tossed bandoliers of linked rounds to the gunners, directed younger privates toward cover, and kept her eyes on the ridgeline beyond the wire. The colonel arrived at the command post, barking orders, coordinating defense. He glanced toward the ammo tent and froze. Harper wasn't loading mags anymore. She had slung a Barrett M82 across her shoulder, the massive .50 caliber sniper rifle gleaming under the floodlights. With calm determination, she climbed the nearest tower ladder 2 rungs at a time. "Who issued her that rifle?" "The colonel," demanded. A sergeant shook his head. "Sir, nobody. That's hers." Mattis's eyes hardened. He knew that rifle, not standard issue, but custom modified, with a suppressor fitted and a hand-carved mark along the stock. Whoever carried it wasn't ordinary. Up on the tower, Harper settled in. She adjusted the bipod, her cheek resting, against the stock with the ease of muscle memory. Mortars continued to whistle in the distance, but she ignored them. Through her scope, the desert unfolded. She could see muzzle flashes from the hills 2 kilometers out. Enemy insurgents, skilled and hidden, trying to zero in on the base. Her breathing slowed. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil thundered, the Barrett kicking against her shoulder. A half-second later, one muzzle flash went dark. She racked the bolt, chambered another round, another shot, another flash gone. The Marines in the yard stopped to watch. Word spread quickly. The supply girl was picking off enemies faster than their best marksmen. In the command post, Mattis demanded answers. "Who is she?" A captain swallowed hard, pulling a faded folder from a secure drawer. Sir, she's not just logistics. She was transferred here under a cover assignment. Codename Valkyrie 7. Mattis's jaw clenched. He knew the name. Valkyrie 7 was a ghost story in sniper circles, a sharpshooter with confirmed kills at distances considered impossible. Rumors tied her to covert missions in Iraq, to joint training ops with Navy SEALs, even whispers that she'd bested Craig Harrison's British record. But her file had gone dark years ago, and now she was here, in the dust and wire of Afghanistan, loading magazines because nobody knew who she was. On the ridge, the attackers regrouped, shifting positions. Harper adjusted, calculating wind, distance, and angle with instinct alone. Her shots cracked across the desert, each one precise, each one a lifeline for the Marines below. Machine guns opened up from the towers, mortars counter-fired, but it was her steady rhythm that broke the enemy's will. After an hour, the assault faltered. The ridge went quiet. Survivors scattered into the night, leaving their dead behind. The base exhaled. Harper climbed down from the tower, her Barrett slung across her back once more. She returned to the ammo tent, sat at the table, and quietly began loading magazines, again, as if nothing had happened. The colonel approached, his boots crunching on gravel. The Marines watched, silent, waiting. He stopped in front of her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with deliberate respect, he removed his cover and gave her a salute. "Valkyrie 7, he said quietly. "I thought you were a myth." She looked up, her eyes steady. "Not a myth, sir. Just a Marine." The men who had once dismissed her stood straighter. In their eyes was something new, not pity, not mockery, but respect. They understood, now that the quiet woman in the ammo tent carried a weight heavier than any of them had imagined. The next morning, as the sun rose over the desert, Harper was no longer invisible. Marines nodded when she passed, saluted when she entered the yard, and though she returned to her post, loading magazines with the same quiet rhythm, everyone knew that if the enemy came again, the base was protected by more than walls and wire. They were protected by Valkyrie 7, the silent marksman who had been among them all along. The desert was a place that stripped men down to bone and grit. Day after day, the sun scorched the ridgelines, and the night swallowed them whole in silence. For the Marines stationed at Outpost Trident, life was measured in patrols, watch shifts, and the constant thud of helicopters coming and going. Among the squad, there was one soldier who barely drew notice. She was slender, quiet, and kept to herself. Her assigned duty was logistics. She carried crates of ammunition, stacked supplies, and spent long hours under a makeshift canopy snapping 5.56 rounds into magazines. The others nicknamed her the Loader. To most, she was background noise, just another body helping keep the real fighters moving. She didn't mind the quiet. She had lived in the shadows before. The only one who seemed to notice her work was the colonel. He had arrived only a week earlier, a weathered man with sharp eyes who had spent years in combat zones. He carried himself with the air of someone who had seen everything, but when his gaze drifted toward the girl at the ammo table, something in her precision unsettled him. He had seen soldiers load mags before. Some rushed, some fumbled, some got sloppy when fatigue set in. But not her. Every round clicked into place as though it were part of a ritual. Her movements were fluid, economical, unbroken by hesitation. One evening, the colonel approached. "Specialist," he said simply. "Name?" "Harper, sir." Her voice was calm, even. "Where'd you serve before this?" "Logistics." "Always." "Logistics, sir." He didn't press her, though the thought lingered in his mind. Something about the way she carried herself didn't match her file. The question answered itself days later. It was just after dawn when the outpost came alive with gunfire. Dust rose in clouds as incoming rounds struck the outer walls. Mortars thudded against the earth. The Marines scrambled for cover, returning fire from the towers, shouting positions over the radios. The colonel sprinted to the command post, scanning the ridges beyond the wire. The attack was organized, too coordinated for a random strike. Enemy shooters had dug in across the hills, their muzzle flashes sparking like fireflies in the rising sun. And then he saw her. While others rushed to their stations, Harper moved differently. She didn't panic, didn't freeze. She slipped behind a supply crate, lifted a long, weathered case, and unlatched it. Inside was no standard-issue weapon. It was a rifle, sleek and customized, its barrel fitted with a long suppressor. The colonel's eyes widened. He knew that rifle. It was the kind carried only by elite marksmen, a precision weapon designed for distances measured in kilometers. She climbed the observation tower with it slung across her back. Marines below shouted after her, confused. Some even laughed, thinking the supply girl was making a fool of herself. But when she settled at the top of the tower, her demeanor silenced every doubt. She lay prone, adjusted the bipod, and pressed her cheek against the stock with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Through her scope, the ridge exploded into detail. She counted the enemy positions, marked the arcs of fire, calculated distance and wind. Her breathing slowed. The first shot cracked. Downrange, nearly 2 kilometers away, an enemy machine gunner fell silent. The Marines below looked up. 1 shot, 1 kill. The colonel's radio buzzed with confusion. "Sir, who's up in Tower 2? She just dropped a gun team at extreme range." He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Harper, watching the myth unfold. She adjusted, shifted slightly, and fired again. Another muzzle flash went dark. Her rhythm was unshakable, every movement deliberate, every shot clean. The colonel felt a memory stir. Oh, name whispered through ranks years ago, spoken in hushed tones by those who believed in legends. Phantom 7. A sniper who had appeared on missions no one could officially confirm, leaving behind records that shattered belief. A marksman who had supposedly trained alongside Chris Kyle, who had matched shots with Craig Harrison, who had ghosted across Iraq and vanished before anyone could pin down the truth. He had dismissed it as myth. But now, as the woman in the tower turned the tide of battle with quiet precision, he wasn't so sure. The attackers realized too late that they were being dismantled. Their mortars fell silent as spotters were picked off. Their ambush positions collapsed as one after another fell to the invisible hand on the tower. Panic spread through their ranks. The organized assault unraveled into retreat. Within an hour, the ridge went quiet. The Marines cheered, slapping each other on the back, shouting victory. But their eyes kept drifting toward the tower, toward the lone figure who now packed away her rifle as calmly as she had brought it out. When Harper climbed down, the colonel was waiting. She paused, rifle slung across her back, dust clinging to her uniform. Her face was steady, but her eyes told a different story. A soldier who had carried too much for too long. The colonel didn't shout. He didn't demand. He simply looked at her and said, "Phantom 7. The yard fell silent. The Marines, who overheard, froze, the name striking them with the weight of a ghost story come to life. Harper didn't flinch. She gave a faint nod. "Sir." The colonel studied her for a long moment. "Why logistics?" Her answer was simple. "Sometimes it's easier to disappear in plain sight." For a long while, no one spoke. Then the colonel did something unexpected. He straightened, raised his hand, and gave her a salute. It wasn't the salute of a superior to a subordinate. It was the salute of a warrior to another warrior. The Marines who had once dismissed her, who thought she was just a girl stacking crates and filling ammo, now saw her differently. Their silence turned to respect, their smirks replaced by nods. They understood now that courage didn't always wear rank on its sleeve. From that day forward, Harper went back to her quiet place in the logistics tent. She still loaded magazines, still stacked crates, still lived in the background. But when the night fell and the desert winds howled across the ridges, the men of Outpost Trident slept easier. Because they knew the truth. They knew Phantom 7 was watching. And as long as she was there, no enemy would ever claim their ground. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Outpost Ironclad began stirring. The desert was cool in the early morning, the wind carrying grit and the faint scent of spent cordite from previous patrols. Soldiers moved in practiced patterns, checking rifles, stacking ammunition, and briefing for patrols. Among them was a woman who, to most, seemed unremarkable. Her uniform was clean, her hair tied back, her movements quiet and precise. She was assigned to logistics, a job she performed flawlessly, ensuring magazines were loaded, weapons maintained, and supplies organized. The Marines around her hardly gave her a second glance. She was Specialist Harper, the girl who carried crates, the one who ensured the men were ready. But Harper was more than what anyone knew. She had lived a life that few could imagine, trained in shadows, carrying skills that the most experienced soldiers only whispered about. Her code name was Revenant, and her past was written in records classified far beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. The morning calm shattered with a sudden alarm. Explosions rippled across the perimeter. Mortars slammed into the outer defenses, shaking walls and scattering sand into the air. Shouts erupted across the outpost. Marines scrambled to their posts, rifles in hand, eyes scanning the surrounding ridges. Amid the chaos, Harper moved differently. She didn't panic. She didn't stumble. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had walked through worse and survived. As others ran for cover, she retrieved a black custom sniper rifle from a secure case. The weapon was nearly as long as she was tall, its barrel fitted with a suppressor and scope optimized for extreme distances. The colonel on duty, a veteran of multiple campaigns, spotted her immediately. He had served with some of the greatest marksmen in history and recognized the rifle. Few could handle it with the efficiency and calm Harper displayed. "Who authorized that?" he barked. No one answered. Harper climbed the observation tower with methodical speed. She lay prone, adjusted the bipod, and pressed her cheek against the stock. From her vantage point, the desert spread out like a chessboard. Enemy fighters had dug in on the distant ridge, trying to coordinate an ambush on the base. Their movements were careful, but they were no match for the woman now perched above them. Her breathing slowed. She focused. The wind whispered across the sand. Distance, elevation, and trajectory calculated automatically, almost instinctively. The first shot echoed across the desert. One enemy rifleman slumped forward. Harper barely moved. She worked the bolt, loaded another round, and fired again. Another target went down. The Marines below stopped and stared. The girl they thought was just a logistics specialist was performing feats they had only seen in training simulations. Rumors raced. "It's Revenant," someone whispered. Another shook, his head in disbelief. "No way! She's supposed to be a myth," the colonel observed, his mind racing. He remembered the stories. Whispers of an elite sniper who had trained with Navy SEALs and the British SAS, one who had accomplished missions so classified that even her own comrades often doubted her existence. And now she was here, saving the lives of every Marine in the outpost with skill and precision that bordered on the legendary. Shots rang out in succession, each one calculated and deadly. The attackers began to falter, their coordinated assault unraveling under the invisible hand of Harper's rifle. A mortar team went silent, a vehicle attempting to flank the base was neutralized, and panic set in among the enemy ranks. The colonel called over the radio. "Who is in Tower 3? No answer. He scanned the tower. There she was, calm as ever, methodical, precise, a ghost in the chaos. Then, a single thought struck him. Codename Revenant. Her reputation had been whispered in special ops circles for years. Now, standing before him through the distance and chaos, it was undeniable. As the battle drew to a close, the attackers retreated, leaving the ridges empty. The outpost exhaled collectively. Marines cheered, some slapping each other on the back, others wiping sweat and dust from their faces. But their eyes kept returning to the tower, to the quiet woman who had turned the tide of the fight. Harper climbed down. Her rifle was secure on her back once more. Dust clung to her uniform, but her movements were composed. She returned to her post in the logistics tent and began loading magazines as if nothing had happened. The colonel approached, boots crunching in the sand. He stopped in front of her and studied her. "Specialist Harper," he said, quiet but firm. "Do you know the weight of what you just did?" She glanced up, calm, unwavering. "Sir, I did what was necessary." He nodded, realizing she didn't seek recognition. She never had. Her skill was a tool, not a boast. "Revenant," he said, softly. "You've saved more lives than anyone here could count. I don't know what to call you except a soldier." Harper gave a faint nod. "That's enough, sir." The Marines who had watched her in awe now approached, offering hesitant salutes. They had underestimated her for months, thinking her quiet diligence was all she could offer. Now they understood. Courage wasn't always loud. Heroism didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waited, silent, unseen, until it was needed most. Over the next days, the base operated differently. Soldiers respected her presence, not just because of her skill, but because of her discipline, calm, and bravery under fire. Harper remained in the shadows, continuing her logistics work, quietly keeping the base supplied. But the legend had returned. At night, when the desert wind howled across the outpost, the soldiers would often glance toward the ridges and the towers. They didn't need to worry. They had Revenant. They had the silent protector who had walked among them, unnoticed, until the moment of truth. And in the quiet of the logistics tent, Harper simply stacked magazines, each round clicking into place. Each one a promise that when danger came again, she would be ready. She had been underestimated her entire career, dismissed as a girl who moved crates. But she carried more than ammunition. She carried precision, courage, and the quiet strength of someone who had survived where most would fail, and she had proven beyond doubt that heroes often come in unexpected forms. The colonel watched her from a distance that evening, his eyes thoughtful. "The world should know the name," he muttered. But he knew better. Some legends were meant to remain in the shadows. Some warriors preferred to fight without applause, without recognition. Specialist Harper, codename Revenant, would always be one of those. And as long as she walked among them, Outpost Ironclad would remain safe.